Alright, so Euphoria Season 3 Episode 2 has been released on HBO Max, and we are here today to do our episode review, recap, and breakdown, where we go over all of the important events that took place in this episode, and then I'm going to give my rating at the very end, so stay tuned for that. But without further ado, let's go ahead and get into this episode review. Let's go. So first things first, this episode is titled America, My Dream. We open up this episode by picking back up with Maddie Perez. We see her on the hunt. We see her desperate to prove herself in the manager department to make a name for herself out in what seems to be LA. We see her improvising a meeting with what will eventually become her boss. And then we get Euphoria's take on the global pandemic that happened, a couple years ago. Now, while Maddie seems to be doing much better for herself, she still longs for wanting more. So she's on the search. She's on the hunt for new clients that she can become a manager for. And she ends up finding the character of Caitlin. Now, Caitlin is what will eventually become an OF model, and Maddie is her manager. And once her boss finds out about this, because Maddie introduced Caitlin to one of her boss's clients, this mainstream actor that we keep seeing brought up in the past 2 episodes, her boss is furious. Maddie has to drop the client. Caitlin goes off and makes like $700,000, something insane like that. Maddie misses out on all of that. So because of that, she is now on the hunt to get back into this realm. That is where we see the character of Cassie come back into play, her former best friend. Cassie sends Maddie a DM asking her to manage her, to give her some tips, asking if they can meet up. We'll talk about where that leads in just a bit, but the next scene that we see take place is Rue and Alamo Brown. This is my favorite character in the show right now. Rue and Alamo Brown, this partnership that they have. We see them shooting guns together. We see Rue having to take care of Alamo Brown's farm. She's taking care of his pigs on the farm, and that's important because it comes into play later. But we also see that Alamo Brown is making Rue clean up any evidence from the overdose that took place in episode 1 due to Lori sending him bad drugs. Now we move over into one of my favorite scenes in this entire episode, where Alamo Brown is on the phone with Lori, the drug dealer, Rue's former boss, and they're going back and forth. He's complaining to her about how she sold him this fentanyl dose, which made one of his girls overdose. She says that they had nothing to do with that. Her boyfriend, or whoever this person happens to be, is just yelling racial slurs the whole time. Don't know where this came from. It was never a part in the show up to this episode. I feel like for 3 seasons, even when we've seen the Lori character in the past, we never seen like this whole racist group that she hangs out with. So this seems to come out of complete left field, and we'll talk more about how that comes into play later on towards the end of the episode. But come to find out, the reason this dose was fentanyl laced was because Faye did not clean her scale before packing up the next drugs for Lori. No one told her to clean her scale, so of course a little bit of fentanyl is enough to take out an elephant, and that's exactly what we see happen inside of episode 1. So while it is, a mistake on Lori's part, they don't exactly know that they are actually responsible for this. And so he's pretty much saying, hey, listen, you killed one of my girls, I'm gonna take Rue. Lori doesn't want that to happen. They have their back and forth, and at the very end of the conversation on the phone, and this is where the pig thing comes back into play, with Rue being on the farm with the pigs. At the very end of the conversation, Lori specifically calls Alamo Brown a pig, and this seems to get under his skin even more than being called the N-word. Even more than being called a slur. He's like, why a pig specifically? And again, to me, that just says, okay, Lori has some inside information on this guy. She happens to know about this farm that he has Rue taken care of. So I guess we'll see how that comes into play. He also stresses about it in a later conversation in the episode. We'll talk about it once we get to that part. But moving on to the next scene, we see Rue finally got a promotion. She's been moved into one of Alamo Brown's strip clubs. This is like her dream job, at least she says so now she's just a regular worker there. She's handling the girls, she's dealing with the girls, she's taking care of anything that needs to be taken care of at the strip club. We see her hooking up with one of the strippers there by the name of Angel. She's doing drugs with her. They go in the back of Angel's car. They do God knows what. All right, and then we get this flashback scene where we discover that Rue relapsed quite some years ago while hanging out with Jules, so we got to see Jules a little bit more. And then she called her mom. We get this, very sad scene of her calling her mom, asking to come home, asking why her little sister's not responding. Her family pretty much cut her off, and she says that she's pretty much been on a bender. She's never been sober since that event took place. So I guess there's our answer on what's going on with Rue. But to be honest, she seems like she's doing relatively better, at least compared to how she was doing in season 1 and season 2. Now let's go ahead and talk about Tish. because this is the overdose stripper from episode 1. Apparently Tish was best friends with Angel, the girl Rue's been hooking up with, this girl working at the strip club, and so Angel's been throwing a hissy fit. Okay, she's making an absolute hell out of her work environment and just causing havoc, causing a ruckus. He's worried about what happened to Tish. He's calling her over and over. They're not answering. Alamo Brown and his people are telling her, listen, she found love. She ran off with some guy and that's what happened to her. We know that to not be the case. Now in the next scene, we see Rue and Maddie hanging out. Maddie's dressing up all fancy. Rue's like, where are you going? What are you going to do? She tells Rue that Cassie DM'd her. She's going to see Cassie. And then that's pretty much where we take off from there. We see Cassie doing her OF photo shoot. This is where like a lot of the controversial pictures on Twitter were floating around. You know, it came from this scene in this episode with Cassie doing her photo shoot with her maid. And then we get the meeting, finally, the reunion between old best friends Cassie and Maddie. They end up meeting at this hotel by a poolside. Maddie pulls up looking extremely fancy, extremely over the top. She's clearly trying to sell an image of wealth to Cassie, and Cassie believes it because she's an idiot. Then we see Cassie have a little bit too much to drink, and then she starts finally being her true self, telling the truth and saying everything that she actually wanted to say while meeting Maddie in this here moment. And that's pretty much that. She wants Maddie to manage her. So Maddie agrees to the circumstances. She agrees to manage her, and that's pretty much where we leave off with that scene there. Now we move over back into Nate Jacobs. We see Cal make an appearance in this series again. That's of course Nate's dad. Okay, he's talking to his son again. He shows up at his house. We haven't seen this character in quite some time, and the real actor for Cal did pass away. We discussed that in episode 1 review, so make sure you go watch the episode 1 review. But rest in peace to the actor for Cal. His name is Eric Dane. He passed away in February, so rest in peace to Eric Dane. Okay, now to discuss the next scene, we have Nate meeting with a business partner. This business partner is telling him he owes him, $550,000, and by next week it's going to be $600,000. So we see Nate is truly having financial issues, which is why he couldn't get the flowers for Cassie, which again is driving a wedge in between them. That plot line comes back into play later on in this episode. We'll talk about it then. But we see Nate start to plot out of desperation, and that moves us into our next scene. We pick back up in the strip club with Rue and Angel. Angel is again causing havoc, throwing shoes at the manager. Rue finally talks to this girl and she ends up telling her the truth that Tish OD'd. Angel is mourning the loss of her best friend after this. She starts spiraling, starts going out of control, stops taking care of her business at the strip club, and that causes Alamo Brown to tell Rue, hey, take this girl to rehab. I have some resources for things like this. Take her to this location. I'll pay for it so you don't have to worry about that. And then we move back over into Nate Jacobs. He's at this like country club, or he's at his house, I believe. He's throwing this grand party, inviting all of these investors over, trying to get them to invest in his company so of course he could pay off his other business partners that he's in the hole with. And he's pretty much trying to finesse them, essentially. Now, while he's hustling at the country club, the other girls there are gossiping about what Cassie's been doing, and that gets brought to Nate's attention. Now, while he told Cassie, listen, go do what you have to do, he didn't tell her, let the entire world know about it, which they end up eventually finding out about. So he has a problem with this. He says, listen, just delete the account. Okay, delete it, be done with it. I'll pay for the flowers for the wedding. She pretty much blackmailed him into getting these damn flowers for the wedding. Again, Cassie is an absolute dumbass. It is what it is. And that's pretty much where we see the plot line conclude with those characters, at least for this episode. Now to pick back up with Rue and Angel, we see her finally taking her to the rehab. She takes her to this facility that's under Alamo Brown's care. This place looks extremely sketchy. It looks like you cannot trust these people as far as you could throw them. All right, they're at the counter. They check her in, they check Angel in, they walk her down this corridor. And then Rue's like, is there any paperwork? What do I have to fill out? Do I have to fill out anything? She's like, no, there's no paperwork. Just get out of here. Just go. So Rue is already on 10. Like, okay, this place is extremely suspicious. This is clearly not like a real rehab facility. To me, it seemed like, I don't know, like they were about to do something very strange to Angel there. Like they were about to ship her off somewhere else. As Rue's leaving the facility, she gets in her car. You see like this ambulance pulling in. To me, that said, okay, they're about to take her somewhere other than this rehab facility, and she's not actually going off to rehab. This place is extremely suspicious. But again, we gotta wait till the next episode to see what happens with that plot line. Now, as Rue is sitting in her car and about to drive off, we see someone in another car. We don't get to see their face, but the camera pans in on their hand in the car, clearly watching Rue, spying on Rue. And my best guess as to who this person would be, I think it's someone from Lori's camp that's keeping an eye out on Rue and her whereabouts. And now we take the hardest transition in the entire episode. This is insane. All right, I don't know why they did this, but we transition over to Faye and back into like Lori's camp. Okay, so we pick back up with Faye, and it is a hard transition to her just getting packed out. Like, that's the best way I could say it. That's the most like PG way I could say it for YouTube. But yeah, it was an insane scene. They held on the shot for way too long. This scene went on for way too long. They have a Third Reich flag in the back as this scene is taking place. It's like, Sam Levinson, what are we doing here, bro? What are we doing here? We're going too far now, okay? And by the way, this actor in this scene, Faye, or actress, I guess we could say, this actress who plays Faye actually is a supposed retired porn star, I guess we could say. Okay, again, we're trying to keep it PG over here for the most part. But yeah, so the fact that, you know, she retired from that job and now she's just doing that same job, but on one of the biggest TV shows in America, absolutely insane. Don't know what that transition was about. But anyway, come to find out there's some noise going on inside of Lori's house. They go to check it out. There's this pig, this giant, humongous pig inside of Lori's house, just using the bathroom all over the place. Okay, making an absolute mess. They're trying to shoo the pig out of there. And then they see what looks to be like a handkerchief or something on the pig. They take it off. They read it, some letter or something. It says, "Remember the Alamo." Now, if you know anything about history, then you'll know what that's about. But of course, this is a reference to Alamo Brown, pretty much sending a message to Lori that, hey, we are going to get our revenge on you for calling him a pig over the phone. Again, he really had a problem with that insult specifically. And so I guess we'll see what happens next between these two characters come episode 3. But now let's move over into the final scene of this episode. And it's one of the most important scenes because we see Rue and Jules finally reunite inside of this series. Rue, I guess, reaches out to Jules. She was talking about it earlier in the episode that she wanted to. So she reaches out to Jules. She finally meets up with her. They go inside of this elevator of this skyscraper that Jules is living in. And then when they get in the elevator, we get this awkward scene where they're just going floors up and up and up and up all the way to the penthouse, the biggest spot in the entire building that you can own. And Rue is very impressed, okay? And at first I'm thinking, okay, Jules has done extremely well for herself in art school. Has art school really paid off this much for Jules? Like, I could kind of see it, but I'm not really sure. And then come to find out it's actually Jules' boyfriend's place. So I guess her boyfriend is, you know, some rich artist, some famous artist, something like that, someone who could actually afford the penthouse, and he has multiple of these places, so he's just letting Jules stay there while he's off with his family. Come to find out her relationship isn't monogamous whatsoever. Rue seems to have a problem with it. She disapproves, and then, you know, they have their little back and forth. Jules says, hey, listen, it's not going to be like it was back in the day, but ultimately at the end of the episode, it ends up hinting that Rue and Jules are going to hook up again for old time's sake, right? That's essentially where this episode ends. We cut to black right there after Jules invites Rue over. And honestly, this was a much better episode than episode 1. Again, episode 1 felt like a recap. We were just catching up with our characters, trying to figure out what they were doing for the past couple of years in between this series gap from season 2 to season 3. But now finally in this episode, it felt like a real episode of television. Finally, it actually felt like an episode of Euphoria. I got a lot of what I feel like we've been missing out of this series, especially that we missed in episode 1. And so that felt good. As someone who loved season 1 and enjoyed season 2, I'm glad that we're finally getting real entertainment here. I'm glad that we continued with the plot lines that matter the most, that being the Alamo Brown and the Lori plot line, what's going on with Rue, her working at this strip club. You know, I think those are the most interesting plot lines in this season so far, so I'm glad we got a lot more of that. And it seems like in episode 3 we're going to get even more of that. We have Cassie and Maddie kind of doing their own thing. That doesn't really have anything to do with Rue, even though she hangs out with Maddie from time to time. And we didn't get to see Lexi at all inside of this episode. So yeah, Jules is back. A much better episode. I actually really enjoyed my viewing experience with this episode finally. And with that being said, if I had to rate season 3 episode 2, America My Dream of Euphoria, I would rate this episode a 8.5 out of 10. It gets the 8.5 out of 10. I gave episode 1 a 7. I thought it was passable. Okay, I thought it was serviceable. It was okay. And this time I felt like we actually got some real entertainment and some actual payoff for the most interesting plot lines out of episode 1. So I'm glad to see that happening. Those are my thoughts on this episode, guys. I'm curious to know your thoughts on this episode down in the comment section down below. If you don't know what I do here on Demigod ET, we do film, TV, and pop culture based content. So if you're interested in this type of content, you're the right place. Hit subscribe, hit the like button if you enjoyed this video, and I'll catch you in the next one, guys. Peace.